The alpha who broke me is dying. He isn't falling to a silver blade or a rival's claws. He is rotting from the inside out, right beneath the same moon where he once stood and declared me unworthy of his name. The healers call it a mystery, and the elders call it a curse, but I know exactly what it is. It's the sound of a severed mate bond finally demanding its due. The pack that watched me walk away in shame is now whispering my name in desperation. They thought I was the weak link in their hierarchy, a mistake of fate they could simply discard. Now they realize I wasn't just his mate, I was his lifeline, and without me, his dominance is unraveling like smoke in a winter storm. They expect me to come crawling back. They think a few pleas and a display of weakness will bring me to my knees at his bedside. They are wrong. I didn't just survive the rejection, I outgrew it. I found a life where my worth isn't tied to an alpha's heartbeat or a pack's approval. And as the messengers arrive at my border with their hats in their hands, I have only one question for them. If I was nothing when he was strong, why am I everything now that he's weak? Stay with me for this one, because the man who rejected fate is about to learn that some bonds don't just break, they bite back. And this time, I'm not the one who needs saving. Leave a comment and subscribe to follow what happens when the only woman who can save him must decide whether his life is worth reopening her wounds. She heard about his condition from a stranger, a passing wolf, cautious and unsure, who recognized her scent and hesitated before speaking. They stood at the edge of a neutral crossing, distance carefully measured, respect mixed with discomfort. The alpha is failing, the wolf said quietly. His strength is slipping. She did not ask which alpha. She already knew. The bond stirred faintly in her chest. Not with longing, not with pain, with awareness. A distant echo that had never fully gone silent, no matter how deeply she had buried it beneath distance and resolve. "Why are you telling me?" she asked calmly. The wolf swallowed. "Because the healers say he won't last, and because they believe only you can stabilize him." She laughed softly, not cruelly, not bitterly, just honestly. "They didn't believe in me when it mattered," she said. "Why would they now?" The wolf had no answer. After he left, she stood alone for a long time, staring out over land that finally felt like hers. She had rebuilt her life carefully, piece by piece, after the rejection. Not as a shadow of what she had been meant to be, but as someone whole in her own right. She had stopped measuring herself against his choices, stopped wondering if things would have been different if she had spoken louder, yielded more, stayed quieter. She had survived. And now he was dying. The irony did not escape her. The pack that had once called her expendable now waited on her breath. The alpha who had rejected the mate bond as a liability now clung to it as his last chance. She felt no rush to return, no instinct to rescue, only the weight of a decision she had hoped never to face. The bond had not shattered when he rejected her. It had been wounded, restrained, locked into a suspended state that neither healed nor released. That kind of damage did not fade quietly. It waited, and now it was demanding an answer. Returning would mean walking back into a place that had stripped her of voice and dignity. It would mean standing before the man who had looked at her and chosen pride over fate, and deciding whether his regret deserved her strength. Staying away would mean letting nature take its course, letting the alpha who rejected her face the consequence of that choice. She knew the pack would frame it as duty, as destiny, as obligation, but this was no longer about any of that. This was about whether compassion still had a place in a heart that had learned to survive without it. As the moon began to rise, she closed her eyes and felt the bond respond. Not pleading, not commanding. Waiting. The alpha was dying. And for the first time since the night he rejected her, the choice belonged entirely to her. She did not go back immediately. That was the first choice she made, and it mattered. Instead, she returned to her camp and sat beside the fire until the flames burned low, letting the weight of the news settle without rushing to soften it. The wolves who lived with her now noticed the shift in her scent instantly. Not fear, not grief, something heavier. Someone crossed the neutral ground, one of them said quietly. Yes, she replied. They came from the eastern pack. Yes. No one asked more. They had learned when silence was not avoidance, but processing. When the moon reached its highest point, the bond stirred again, stronger this time. Not pain, not pull, a deep, rhythmic pressure that echoed the failing heartbeat of a man who had once stood tall enough to eclipse everyone around him. She remembered him that way, unyielding, certain, the alpha who had never doubted his own authority until the night he doubted her. The memory returned unbidden, the mating circle, the elder's careful words. His gaze fixed forward, jaw set, voice steady as he declared the rejection. This bond will destabilize the pack, he had said. I won't allow that. He had not looked at her when he spoke. That had been the deepest cut. She rose before dawn and walked alone beyond the ridge, breathing in the cool air, grounding herself in the present rather than the memory. The land responded to her now, steady, familiar. She had earned that. When the next messenger arrived, she did not pretend surprise. This one was younger. Nervous, carrying urgency poorly disguised as respect. They sent me to beg, he admitted quietly. The healers say the alpha won't last another cycle. She studied him calmly. And what do you think? The wolf hesitated. I think we were wrong. She nodded once. That doesn't heal a dying alpha. No, he agreed. But it might bring you back. She turned away from him, staring toward the distant hills that marked the boundary of her former life. You don't ask someone to return to a wound, she said. You ask if they're willing to reopen it. The wolf swallowed. Will you? She did not answer immediately. I'll come, she said finally. But not as his Luna, and not as their solution. Relief flooded the wolf's scent. Then he'll live. She turned back sharply. I didn't say that. The journey back was deliberate. She did not rush. Did not announce herself. Each step toward the pack felt like crossing layers of old expectation she no longer carried. Wolves watched from a distance as she approached the familiar boundary stones. Some with hope, others with guilt, all with uncertainty. The pack smelled different now, weaker. Fear threaded through the air, where confidence once ruled. The alpha's dominance no longer anchored them. It flickered, unstable, leaking through fractured channels. They led her to the inner chambers without ceremony. She saw him before he saw her. The Alpha lay on the stone platform where he had once presided over councils, his body diminished, breath shallow, scent broken into uneven fragments. His power no longer radiated outward. It collapsed inward, feeding on itself. The healers stepped aside as she entered. One whispered, "The bond." She raised a hand. "Do not explain it to me." She stepped closer, every instinct alert, not to protect him, but to protect herself. His eyes opened slowly. Recognition flickered first, then shock, then something raw and unmistakable. Regret. "You came," he rasped. "Yes," she said calmly. "I didn't think you would." "I didn't think you deserved it," she replied. The words landed between them, clean, unsoftened. The bond reacted instantly, surging with painful clarity, not longing, accountability. "You're dying," she continued, "and you want me to save you." He swallowed with effort. "I want you to choose." She met his gaze steadily. "That's new?" Silence stretched, heavy and intimate. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About you. About the bond." "Yes," she agreed. "You were." He flinched, not from the words, but from how easily she spoke them. "You chose the pack over fate," she said. "Now fate is collecting its debt." The healers shifted nervously, but she did not look away from him. "I can stabilize the bond," she said, temporarily. Hope flared in his eyes. "But understand this," she continued. "Healing you does not mean forgiving you, and saving your life does not mean returning to it." He closed his eyes briefly, breath shaking. "I accept that." She studied him for a long moment, searching not for remorse, but for truth. Then she reached out, not to touch him, but to the bond itself. It responded immediately, not with warmth, with tension. The Alpha gasped as the pressure in his chest eased slightly, color returning faintly to his skin. The healers exhaled in relief. She stepped back. "This buys you time," she said. "Nothing more." His eyes met hers, heavy with something he could no longer hide. "Then I'll use it wisely." She turned away, already feeling the cost ripple through her chest. The bond was awake now, and it would not be quiet again. Stabilizing the bond did not make her welcome. It made her necessary. She felt it in the way the pack watched her as she moved through familiar corridors, no longer dismissive, no longer assured. Wolves stepped aside now, not out of respect, but caution. Hope had sharpened into expectation, and expectation was heavier than rejection had ever been. She ignored it. The Alpha slept fitfully through the morning, breath steadier but shallow, his dominance pulsing weakly beneath the surface like a heart struggling to remember its rhythm. The healers whispered constantly, tracking every change, every flicker of improvement, as if it were proof of absolution. It wasn't. When he woke again, she was standing near the chamber entrance, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the far wall rather than on him. "You didn't stay," he said hoarsely. "I'm not here to watch you suffer," she replied, "or to reassure the pack." He shifted with effort, grimacing as pain flared. "They think you're the cure." She finally looked at him then. I'm the choice you refused. There's a difference. Silence followed. The bond hummed between them, no longer dormant, but restrained. Like a river held behind a damaged barrier, pressure building with every unspoken truth. They're afraid, he said quietly. Good, she replied. Fear forces honesty. Outside the chamber, the pack council convened without invitation. She could hear them arguing, elders debating how to contain the situation, warriors questioning what her presence meant for authority. One voice cut through clearly. She doesn't belong here anymore. She recognized the speaker instantly. The Alpha heard it too. I'll stop them, he said, trying to rise. She stepped forward sharply. You will not. Her voice carried enough authority to still him instantly. You don't get to protect me now, she said. That would be convenient. His gaze dropped. I know. She turned and left the chamber before he could say more. The council hall felt smaller than she remembered, walls closing in, air thick with unease. Conversation stopped as she entered, all eyes turning toward her with a mixture of hope, guilt, and calculation. She did not sit. You're here because you need me, she said calmly. Not because you've changed, an elder bristled. We never said, you don't have to, she interrupted. Your silence says enough. Another elder spoke carefully. If you can heal him, you can stabilize the pack. She laughed softly, without humor. You still think this is about control. It's about survival, the Alpha's second snapped. Yes, she agreed. Mine. The word landed hard. You rejected me because you feared what I represented, she continued. A bond you couldn't command, a Luna you couldn't shape. Murmurs rippled through the hall. And now, she added, you want me to fix the consequences of that choice without addressing the cause. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. What do you want? One asked quietly. She held their gaze steadily. Truth, spoken publicly, recorded honestly. The Alpha's second frowned. That would undermine. Yes, she said. That's the point. Silence stretched, heavy and unavoidable. I will continue stabilizing the bond, she said. But understand this. If he survives, it will not be because you forced fate into obedience. It will be because you stopped lying about why this happened. The council did not agree immediately, but they did not refuse. That afternoon, she returned to the Alpha's chamber and found him awake, eyes clearer than before. The improvement was subtle, but undeniable. They're angry, he said quietly. They should be, she replied. Anger means the truth reached them. He studied her for a long moment. You're not staying. No. But you're not leaving either. She met his gaze steadily. I'm here until this choice is resolved. And after? He asked. That depends, she said, on whether you're willing to face what you cost me. The bond pulsed in agreement, not tightening, not softening, waiting. That night, she performed the second stabilization ritual. It was more demanding than the first, requiring proximity close enough that she could feel his breath against her skin, his weakened dominance brushing against her senses without the familiar shield of authority. He trembled when the bond responded, pain and relief tangling together. I don't deserve this, he whispered. No, she said quietly. You don't. But she didn't stop. When it was done, He slept deeply for the first time in weeks. She left the chamber exhausted, chest tight with the cost of holding a bond that had once been a source of joy. Outside, the moon hung low and watchful. The pack stood at a crossroads, whether they admitted the truth or repeated it in quieter forms. And she stood in the center of it, no longer the Luna they rejected, but the woman who held their alpha's life in her hands, not out of obligation, but choice. The third night was the hardest. By then, the pack had begun to fracture under the weight of what could no longer be ignored. Stabilization had slowed the alpha's decline, but it had not restored him. His dominance no longer anchored the pack in its old, unquestioned way. Wolves argued more openly. Old alliances strained. Authority leaked through cracks no one knew how to seal. And every fracture pointed back to her. She felt it in the way eyes followed her through the corridors, not hostile, not reverent, measuring. As if the pack were slowly realizing that power no longer sat where they had been trained to look for it. The alpha called for her just after dusk. When she entered the chamber, he was sitting upright for the first time, shoulders squared with effort, jaw clenched against pain. He looked older like this, stripped of certainty, stripped of illusion. "You shouldn't be awake," she said evenly. "I shouldn't be alive," he replied. She did not argue. "The council met again," he said. "They're divided." "Good," she replied. "Consensus built on fear is worse." He studied her for a long moment. "You've changed." She met his gaze steadily. "You just never saw me clearly before." The bond stirred faintly, less restrained now, responding to proximity with uncomfortable honesty. Not warmth, awareness. "I need to say this," he said quietly. Without healers, without witnesses, she crossed her arms. "Say it." "I rejected you because I was afraid," he admitted. "Not of you, but of what the bond would demand of me." Silence fell. "You questioned me," he continued. "You didn't submit easily, and I mistook that for instability." She felt the old wound flare, not sharply but deeply. "You mistook equality for threat." "Yes," he said, "and I chose control." The words hung between them, unsoftened. "I lost the pack the moment I did that," he added. "I just didn't feel it until now." She exhaled slowly. "Regret doesn't heal a bond." "I know," he said, "but I needed you to hear the truth without bargaining attached." The bond pulsed, not forgiving, not closing, acknowledging. Outside the chamber, the pack erupted. Raised voices echoed through the stone halls, urgency sharp enough to cut. She moved instinctively toward the sound, the alpha watching her go without calling her back. The council hall was chaos. "You're letting her dismantle us," one elder shouted. "She's the only thing holding us together," another snapped. "You're all missing the point," the alpha's second barked. "The pack doesn't know who leads anymore." She stepped into the center of the room. "Then stop pretending this is about leadership," she said calmly. Silence slammed down. "You're afraid because the pack is adapting without permission," she continued. "Because obedience is no longer automatic." An elder sneered. "You think this makes you alpha?" "No," she replied. "It makes me honest. You're destabilizing us." "Yes," she agreed. "Because you were stable for the wrong reasons." Murmurs spread. some defensive, some thoughtful. "I won't lead you," she said, "and I won't save you from what comes next." "What comes next?" someone demanded. She held their gaze steadily. "Accountability," the alpha's second scoffed. "That's easy to demand when you're not the one bleeding." She turned to him slowly. "Your alpha is dying because he rejected a bond he couldn't dominate. If you hide that truth, you'll repeat it." The words landed like a blade. "And next time," she added, "you won't have someone willing to stabilize the damage." Silence followed. Thick, unavoidable. That night, the alpha's condition worsened again. The bond surged violently, pressure spiking as his heart stuttered and his breath faltered. Healers rushed in, panic rising as their remedies failed to hold. She felt it instantly, pain lancing through her chest as the bond screamed for release or resolution. She didn't hesitate. The third stabilization was different. It required not just proximity, but connection. She knelt beside him, ignoring the murmurs, the questions, the fear radiating from the room. She placed her hand over his chest and let the bond open fully, not to heal him completely, but to anchor him. He cried out once, breath tearing free as the bond locked into place more firmly than before. She felt the cost immediately. Weakness rippled through her limbs. Her vision blurred briefly as the bond drew deeper than it had before, taking not love, not devotion, but strength. When it was done, the alpha lay still, breathing slow and steady, alive. She stood unsteadily and turned to the healers. "This is the last time," she said quietly. "Next time, the bond will demand a choice neither of us can avoid." They nodded, fearfully. She left the chamber before anyone could stop her, retreating to the outer courtyard where cold air burned her lungs and steadied her shaking hands. The bond no longer whispered. It waited. Inside the pack, lines were redrawing themselves, not around authority, but truth. And soon, there would be no more time to delay what the bond demanded. The fourth night broke something open, not dramatically, not loudly. It broke the way bone does under sustained pressure, quietly, irrevocably. She felt it before the pack did. The bond shifted without warning, no longer content with stabilization or restraint. It tightened, not painfully, but insistently, drawing her awareness inward, then outward, toward him. Toward the truth they had both delayed. She was in the outer courtyard when the surge hit. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened just enough that she had to brace herself against the cold stone wall. The moon above was full, mercilessly bright, and for the first time since she'd returned, she felt the full weight of what that meant. The bond was no longer asking whether she would help. It was asking how far. Inside the pack, panic followed seconds later. She heard it in the sudden spike of noise. Shouts, hurried footsteps, the sharp scent of fear. She pushed away from the wall and moved without hesitation, ignoring the protest of her body as the bond pulled tighter with every step. The alpha was convulsing when she reached him, not violently, but rhythmically, as if his body were fighting to remember a pattern it had lost. His breath came uneven, eyes unfocused, dominance flaring and collapsing in broken waves that sent shock through the pack. "He's slipping," a healer cried. "We can't anchor him." She raised a hand. "Move." They did. She knelt beside him, ignoring the way the bond flared at proximity. Hot, demanding, final. This was no longer a temporary measure. She knew it with terrifying clarity. "This will change everything," she said quietly, not to the healers, not to the pack, but to him. His gaze flickered toward her, awareness swimming through pain. "Then don't," he rasped. The words struck harder than any plea. She hesitated, not because she didn't know what to do, but because she finally understood what it would cost. This time, stabilizing him would require shared consequence. The bond would no longer tolerate imbalance. If she anchored him again, it would bind them into mutual accountability, neither dominant, neither subordinate, equal. "You don't get to choose this for me," she said quietly. "I know," he whispered. "That's why I'm asking you not to." The bond surged violently, pressure cresting like a breaking wave. The healers watched in frozen terror as she closed her eyes and made her choice. She opened the bond fully. Not as Luna, not as rejected mate, as herself. The connection snapped into place with brutal clarity. No warmth, no romance. Just truth slamming through every barrier they had built. He gasped, back arching as the bond restructured itself. No longer centered on his dominance, no longer weighted toward her sacrifice. It balanced. The backlash hit her immediately. Pain lanced through her chest, sharp enough to steal her breath. She cried out once, then forced herself to stay present as the bond settled into a new configuration, one neither of them had ever experienced. The alpha collapsed back onto the stone, breath evening, color returning more fully than before. Alive, awake, changed. She slumped back on her heels, shaking, vision blurring as the room spun briefly. Strong hands caught her before she could fall. Wolves from her own camp, not the pack's warriors. The alpha sat up slowly, eyes clear now, too clear. He looked at her not as alpha, not as owner of authority, but as a man who had just felt the full weight of what he had once dismissed. "What did you do?" an elder demanded, voice trembling. She lifted her head, exhaustion etched into every line of her posture. "I removed the imbalance." "You bound yourself to him," the elder accused. "No," she replied hoarsely. "I bound him to consequence." The alpha spoke then, voice steady despite the shock still rippling through him. "The bond is no longer hierarchical." Silence fell like a dropped blade. "What does that mean?" someone whispered. "It means," he said slowly, "that I cannot rule without accountability, and I cannot discard fate without paying for it." All eyes turned to her. She pushed herself to her feet, supported briefly before standing on her own. "This was the final stabilization," she said. "There will be no more interventions." "And if he falters again?" the alpha's second demanded. She met his gaze without flinching. "Then he lives, or dies, by the truth of his choices, as we all should." The bond hummed, no longer strained, no longer silent, balanced. The pack stood in stunned quiet as the realization spread. The alpha had been saved, yes, but not restored to what he had been. And she was no longer a solution they could summon at will. She was a boundary. That night, she did not remain in the inner chambers. She returned to the outer grounds, sitting beneath the moon with her back straight and her breath steadying, feeling the bond settle into its new, uncompromising shape. The Alpha joined her later, keeping a respectful distance. "You didn't just save me," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "I saved the truth you tried to outrun." He bowed his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The bond accepted it, and somewhere deep within the pack, something old and brittle finally cracked beyond repair. The pack did not know how to exist with what she had done. That became clear by morning. The Alpha walked among them without the weight they had once relied on, his dominance no longer pressing outward, no longer silencing dissent by instinct alone. Wolves felt it immediately. Some straightened, relieved. Others grew uneasy, as if the ground beneath them had shifted and they were unsure where to place their feet. Authority had not vanished. It had changed shape. She watched from the edge of the courtyard as council members argued in low, urgent voices. Words like precedent, instability, and dangerous imbalance threaded through the air. No one mentioned the word they were truly afraid of: equality. The Alpha found her near the boundary stones shortly after sunrise. "You should rest," he said carefully, as if each word were being weighed before release. She didn't turn. "So should you." "I've rested enough," he replied. "Too much, perhaps?" She glanced at him then, noting the difference. His posture still strong but no longer rigid, his gaze searching rather than commanding. "They're afraid," he said quietly. "Not of you, of what this means." "Yes," she agreed. "Fear is honest when it's no longer protected by hierarchy." "They're questioning whether you should stay." She smiled faintly. "They've been questioning that since the night you rejected me." "That was different," he said. She met his gaze steadily. "Was it?" He exhaled slowly. "No." The bond stirred, not with pain, not with longing, with clarity. "You saved me," he said. "And in doing so, you dismantled the illusion I ruled by." "I didn't dismantle it," she corrected. "I stopped compensating for it." Silence followed. By midday, the council convened openly. No closed doors. No selective invitations. Wolves gathered in the outer hall, listening as elders struggled to articulate what had changed without admitting who was responsible. The Alpha stood when it was his turn to speak. "I rejected a bond because I feared losing control," he said plainly. "That fear nearly destroyed this pack." Murmurs rippled through the hall. "I will not pretend otherwise," he continued. "My authority is no longer absolute, and if that frightens you, it should." Gasps followed. "You can't just—" an elder began. "I can," the Alpha interrupted, "because the bond no longer allows me to hide behind tradition." All eyes turned to her. She did not step forward. "This is not about replacing one leader with another," she said calmly from where she stood. "If that's what you're hoping for, you've misunderstood everything." "Then why are you here?" someone demanded. She held their gaze steadily, to ensure the truth is not erased once the crisis passes. The room fell quiet. "You don't need me to rule," she continued. "You need me to leave evidence." The Alpha nodded slowly. "She stays," he said. "Not as Luna, not as leader, as witness. The council argued, but less fiercely than before, because arguing now required justification rather than reflex. That evening, wolves approached her individually. Some apologized, awkwardly, imperfectly. Others asked questions they had never dared to voice before. A few said nothing at all, simply acknowledging her presence with a nod that held more weight than words. One young wolf asked softly, "Do you hate him?" She considered the question carefully. "No." "But you don't forgive him either?" "No." The distinction mattered. As night fell, the alpha joined her again near the ridge. "They're discussing reforms," he said quietly. "Changes to bond law, to succession." She raised a brow. "Already?" "They're afraid not to," he admitted. She looked out over the pack, fires burning lower now, conversations quieter, but deeper. "You'll lose some wolves," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "and we'll lose what we pretended to be." The bond pulsed gently, neither demanding nor retreating. "I won't stay forever," she said. "This place is no longer my center." He nodded. "I know." "But I won't disappear quietly either," she added. "Not this time." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I wouldn't expect you to." They stood in companionable silence as the moon rose again, full, unyielding, honest. The pack had been saved, but it would never be the same, and that, she knew, was the real consequence of rejecting fate. Change does not announce itself gently. It seeps into routines, alters expectations, and exposes fault lines that were once held together by fear and habit. By the second morning after the alpha's recovery, the pack felt unfamiliar even to those who had lived within its borders their entire lives. Orders were no longer obeyed automatically. Questions were asked, quietly at first, then openly. Wolves debated patrol routes, resource allocation, even the old laws governing mate bonds and succession. Some embraced it with cautious relief. Others bristled, sensing their influence thinning. She watched it all from the periphery, neither directing nor withdrawing. That, more than anything, unsettled them. A group of warriors confronted the alpha near the training grounds, voices sharp with frustration. "You've weakened us," one said bluntly. "Other packs will smell it." The alpha didn't bristle, didn't assert dominance. "They already did," he replied calmly, "and they learned we're still standing." "But without authority." "Authority isn't gone," he interrupted. "It's accountable now." The words echoed through the yard like a dropped blade. By midday, messengers arrived from neighboring packs, some cautious, some hostile. Rumors had spread faster than truth ever did. That the alpha had been bound, that a rejected mate now held power, that the pack was vulnerable. She met the first delegation herself. They expected confrontation. They got honesty. "The alpha lives," she said plainly. "But the law that nearly killed him doesn't." A visiting beta sneered. "You expect us to believe a pack can survive without dominance?" She met his gaze steadily. "I expect you to notice that yours nearly didn't." The delegation left unsettled, carrying more questions than threats. That night the alpha sought her out again, this time not near the ridge, but in the old moon hall, where bond ceremonies had once been conducted. They're pressuring me to formally reinstate you, he said quietly, as Luna, as balance. She looked around the space, at the worn stone, the faded runes carved by generations who believed power flowed in only one direction. That would undo everything, she said. I know, he replied, but it would quiet them. She turned to face him fully. Silence is what broke this pack. The bond stirred in agreement. They're afraid you'll leave, he admitted. I will, she said gently, just not in the way I left before. He nodded, accepting the truth without argument. Before dawn, the fracture came. A faction within the pack, those who had benefited most from the old order, attempted to assert control by force. They gathered loyalists, invoked tradition, and tried to corner the Alpha into reaffirming absolute authority. It failed. Not because she intervened, but because others stood in the way. Wolves who had never spoken in council before challenged the move. Elders refused to endorse it. Warriors laid down weapons rather than turn them inward. The attempted coup collapsed under the weight of its own exposure. When the dust settled, the Alpha addressed the pack openly. There will be wolves who leave, he said, and wolves who stay. Neither choice will be punished. Murmurs rippled, some relieved, some outraged. But understand this, he continued. The bond that governs this pack now requires truth. If you cannot live with that, you are free to go. By sunrise, several had already departed. The pack felt smaller, stronger. She stood at the boundary once more, preparing to leave, not as exile, not as escape, as transition. The Alpha joined her, stopping a respectful distance away. I owe you my life, he said. You owe yourself your honesty, she replied. And you? He asked. She looked back toward the pack one last time. I owe myself forward. The bond hummed softly, not pulling, not tethering, balanced. As she stepped beyond the boundary stones, the Alpha did not call her back, and that, she knew, was how she could finally leave. She did not feel the bond strain when she crossed the boundary stones. That was how she knew the truth had finally settled. In the old days, leaving the pack would have felt like tearing, like abandoning a piece of herself she could never reclaim. But now the bond rested quietly within her, no longer demanding proximity or sacrifice. It existed as acknowledgement, not possession. Behind her, the pack continued without pause. That mattered more than anything. She did not look back immediately. Instead, she walked until the sounds of morning faded into wind and open land. Only then did she stop, pressing a hand briefly to her chest, not in pain, not in longing, in recognition. By midday, news reached her through travelers and scouts who no longer spoke in whispers. The Alpha had convened an open council and formally dismantled the clause that allowed mate bonds to be rejected on grounds of instability. Elders argued, warriors protested, but the law fell anyway, exposed for what it had always been, a shield for fear. Some packs scoffed, others watched carefully, and a few, quietly, began to change. She spent the next nights moving between neutral grounds, never staying long, never announcing herself. Wolves recognized her scent and approached cautiously, curiosity outweighing suspicion. They asked the same questions again and again. Did he really almost die? Did the bond really punish him? Is it true you refused to return as Luna? She answered honestly. Yes. Yes. And yes. Not all believed her, but belief was no longer required for the truth to work. One evening, as she rested near a river bend, a familiar presence approached, controlled, measured, unmistakable. The Alpha stopped several paces away, hands visible, posture open. "I didn't follow you," he said quietly. "I just crossed paths." She smiled faintly. "That's new?" "Yes," he agreed. He looked different now, not diminished, but grounded. Power no longer clung to him like armor. It moved through him more carefully, as if aware it could no longer go unquestioned. "The pack is holding," he said. "Not perfectly, but honestly." She nodded. "That's enough." "I wanted you to know," he continued, "that I won't undo it. Even if pressure comes, even if it costs me my position." She met his gaze steadily. "Then you've learned." They stood in companionable silence, the river murmuring nearby. "You don't owe me anything," he said finally. "No," she replied. "But you respect me now." "Yes," he said simply. The bond acknowledged it, not flaring, not softening, complete. He did not ask her to return. She did not offer to stay. When he left, it was without ceremony, without regret. Weeks passed. Her story spread, not as legend, not as romance, but as warning and possibility. Packs argued over it. Elders dismissed it. Young wolves asked dangerous questions. And somewhere beneath it all, the laws governing power began to bend. She settled eventually near the highlands, where land remained unclaimed not because it was weak, but because it resisted control. Wolves came and went. Some stayed for a season. Some left changed. She never called it a pack. She never claimed leadership. But wolves listened to her anyway. Not because she demanded it, because she had once been rejected and refused to disappear. Under a rising moon, she stood alone on the ridge, feeling the land respond to her presence, not in obedience, but in recognition. The Alpha who had rejected her lived, but the man he had been did not. And the woman he had dismissed had reshaped the rules of survival without ever asking permission. She inhaled slowly, the night air cool and steady in her lungs. Fate had not chosen her. She had chosen herself. He rejected her and nearly died for it. But she walked away alive, whole, and unclaimed, leaving behind a truth no Alpha could ever outrun again.